Welcome to our Green Up TV show. And good morning, everyone, and thank you to all our viewers for being with us for our special session this morning on green hydrogen. We will further discuss about its end-use merit order and the benefits or not of having such mechanism in place. I am Laurie Chenet, your host this morning. Along with my co-host, Antoine Trieux, you are our head of new energies at Natixis CIB. Good morning, Antoine.
Good morning, Laurie. I'm immensely pleased to be here today to discuss this very important topic. So to unlock and unpack this question, we are pleased to be joined on set today by two distinguished guests, Adriana Cruz-Felix, who is Vice President of Sustainable Finance at Moody's Investor Services, and Guillaume de Smet, who is Deputy Vice President, Group Sustainable Development at Air Liquide.
Sorry, just to interrupt, but before starting with our estimated guest, I'm being told that we have a piece of breaking news that just came out. Indeed, Franck Plutat, our head of energy transition and natural resources at Natixis CIB, is just right now in front of Ørsted headquarters. And he just attended the strategic update of their press conference. So, hi, Franck. Can you please let us know what is the French announcement that you've heard about this morning during this conference?
Thank you, Laurie. Indeed, there was a big news this morning by Ørsted saying that they have decided to terminate their project, their e-methanol project that they were supposed to develop in the coming years. So a big decision, because the reason for all that is costs on the market, cost of hydrogen that is too expensive, and the absence of a general market that will help these kind of companies to develop their projects. Is it a kind of unique decision by Ørsted, or are there other players that are doing the same? Recently, we heard that Uniper is taking the same kind of decision by putting on hold their projects for e-fuels, and they were supposed to develop something like $8 billion investments for the market for e-fuels and green hydrogen, generally speaking. At the same time, what we are seeing is Europe still pushing a lot aggressively for the development of a green hydrogen industry. So what does that mean? Are we experiencing today situations where we will see all the players kind of retreating or putting on hold their projects? Is it just a couple of years transition that we need to manage before this market will really develop? Or is it a more serious issue that we will have, possibly, impeaching these projects to be developed? So that's, I think, the kind of questions you will have to raise with your guests today, Laurie, and particularly talking with them about the merit order mechanism that could be put in place or not.
Thank you very much, Franck, for this insight. Really insightful, definitely. So this is puzzling indeed. On one hand, we clearly see that we need the development of green H2 to support our decarbonization journey. But on the other hand, the development of the market is nowhere near what it should be today. So maybe one question for you, Guillaume. Franck just mentioned that some important investments in development of green H2 projects are just cancelled or being postponed because of the lack of demand or the prohibitive costs. So can you tell us what about Air Liquide's perspective and how do you see the development of the green H2 market?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. So I would start by saying that the first priority is to reduce massively the emission, to put the world on track to a 1.5 degree scenario, trajectory, and reach neutrality by 2050, which is, by the way, the objective the company has set for us, to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. So it's one piece, green hydrogen is one piece in this, in the toolbox to achieve the neutrality by decarbonizing many sectors. So that's been recognized. I think there's a lot of scenarios and studies that show the role of green hydrogen in various sectors of the economy, transportation, industry, and so on. What we do, what we have, the stance we have taken as Air Liquide is an ambitious yet realistic stance on the green hydrogen development. It's a story that started more than 10 years ago. In fact, it's a story that started with electrolysis more decades ago because we operate dozens of small-scale electrolyzers. So it's a technology that we know already. But for the energy transition specifically, that's a story that started basically 10 years ago when we developed the first 1 megawatt PEM electrolyzer in Denmark. Then it was followed by a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Canada, and soon after, a 20 megawatt electrolyzer in Germany that has just started. And now we are executing a project for 200 megawatt electrolyzer for green hydrogen production in the Normandy Basin. So we roll out our roadmap. We have other projects under development. I'm not saying it's easy. Developing a very large-scale industrial project based on new technologies when the market are also not mature is not an easy task. But we are rolling out our strategy, following an industrial development path, small scale, medium scale, large scale, and in parallel, we have built with our partner Siemens Energy a joint venture to manufacture electrolyzers in order to kickstart also the scale-up of the value chain as a whole. Beyond the projects themselves, you need also to have the equipment and to have the resources to build the project and to maintain the projects.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Turning now to Adriana. What is the role of green H2 in the net zero scenarios such as NZE? And how these recent announcements, we've seen Franck Plutard just on TV before this, and these market perspectives will impact such scenarios?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. Low carbon hydrogen is seen to play a fundamental role in the decarbonization and achievement of the net zero scenario by the International Energy Agency. And the recent announcements show exactly and emphasize the fact that we need to increase investment in green hydrogen, right? And why is this important? Well, because Guillaume just mentioned it plays a fundamental role decarbonizing hard-to-abate sectors for which direct electrification is not available or it's too costly, such as heavy industry like steel production, chemicals, and also heavy industry like heavy-duty industry like aviation or shipping, right? Also in the medium term, it's also seen to play a fundamental role in terms of energy storage. In particular, to manage the supply and demand of renewable energies. You know, there's a big characteristics in renewables related to the intermittency of renewables, and hydrogen energy storage represents a solution for that, and obviously in terms of international energy trade. However, I think the announcements show that we're not where we're supposed to be. In 2023, only 1% of the 97 million tons of hydrogen were low emissions hydrogen. And then if we look at the projections of the projects that have been announced, it is expected by 2030, low emissions hydrogen will be around 49 million tons per annum, but it's still very short from the 65 that are needed to achieve the net zero scenario by 2030. And then if we look at the status of those projects, only 7% had reached a final investment decision by 2023, late 2023. So it really shows, and the challenge that we have in front of us, and the challenges are really multi-dimensional. It comes from regulatory uncertainty, demand uncertainty, high financing costs, high production costs, and in general, operational challenges. And one of the I think the things that we need to remember is that meeting the targets of the net zero scenario by the International Energy Agency requires an exponential investment. It means that the sector needs to grow at an annual compound growth rate of 90%, which is much more higher than what we have seen in the PV solar sector in its fastest expansion era, right? So it's a huge investment. But on the other side, let's say that there's a silver lining because the International Energy Agency also sees all the cancellations, the postponements, the delays as a maturity in the market. They also see that the producers are taking a step back and thinking where hydrogen is more efficient, where there are a stronger business model, where this solution is going to outcome other available solutions. So I think in the future, the decisions of where to use low carbon hydrogen will be more strategic, more focused on achieving the net zero scenario.
So yes, there is clearly, it's consensual, there is clearly a slowing momentum around the development of green H2. But you've just said that it is crucial for some sectors for them to deliver their decarbonization goals. So how to scale up and how to actually achieve the volume that you are mentioning. So maybe in terms of enablers and what we need, question for you, Guillaume. Do you think the supply and demand dynamics should be the main driver to serve the development of the green H2 market at scale? Or do you see, coming back to our core question, do you see any relevance and interest to set a merit order mechanism linked to the end use of the green H2? Many questions.
Yeah, no, that's a very relevant question. I think that you stressed the main issue we face today with the scale-up of green hydrogen, which is we don't lack project. We lack a bit of project between the 49 and 65, but what we lack is final investment decisions. And basically, what you need to take a final investment decision is a demand for your product, a physical demand. You will produce something that somebody has to take and use, and you need return on your investments. That's basically a bit back to basics, to the core of investments. And when you talk about heavy industry investments, this has to be the case on the lifetime of the equipment, which is something like 15 to 20 years at the minimum. So today, in an ideal world, probably supply-demand-driven investments is what is desirable. We are still at the initiation of the market. What we need today, and I think that's also what all the scenarios stress, is that you need to scale up so that you can go past the learning cost effect, where you need to decrease the cost that will enable the acceleration of the scale-up. This is the mechanics, basically, in all the models, all the net zero models, you have to scale up to decrease the cost in order to accelerate the rollout of the technology to serve the sector where you need it. So what we see today is that basically you have hardly any demand and hardly any stable long-term demand coming from the sector which are seen as the primary targets for green hydrogen, steel, heavy mobility, because they on their side have to invest into their own infrastructure, refueling infrastructure, change of their processes, and so on. So you have already heavy investments on the demand side. So what we are asking, if we are directing directly the green hydrogen to this sector, is that you have the investment happening in both the production, so the production infrastructure, and on the demand side, which is raising the bar in terms of ambition. So what we see today is that leveraging existing demand for the product and having regulation that help build a business case, a bankable business case, like what we see in Europe, where you have the RED II enabling a bankable demand for green hydrogen from existing refineries, where you have already a demand for the product. And I want also to stress that the demand of hydrogen for refineries is in order to achieve a non-virtual goal, which is a reduction of sulfur emissions, which is not to be forgotten when we talk about the negative impacts of hydrogen production for refineries. You have also massive positive pollution and health impacts. And that helps building the project. And that's how we have managed to develop the 200 megawatt project I was mentioning in Normandy. And then we leverage this project. We announced 4 days ago 50 million euro investment into logistics assets in order to serve and to support the development of the hydrogen mobility in the Paris area. So we leverage the existing demand to build the production base, and then we leverage the ability to take this investment decision to invest into the development of the refueling infrastructure with the partners for the hydrogen mobility. And that's where what we need is more projects like this in order, again, to scale up, to load the electrolyzer factories, to decrease the cost, and to be able to accelerate, while in parallel, the heavy mobility sector, the steel sector are investing themselves to change their process to accept hydrogen. So it's a fine mechanics. Then finding the right policy design is probably not an easy task, but that's where we need to go.
Adriana, you touched upon the perspectives of the market, also the current pace of development of this market. Interesting to have your views, given the limited supply and I'd say slow developments of this market today, on whether we would need to think of implementing a merit order while the market develops.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention this idea of limited availability of low carbon hydrogen, right? And there's a recent study that we published at Moody's where we estimate that hydrogen in general will not really represent a significant decarbonization role in the next decade. And it's mainly because of that, right? Because the market is not yet where it should be because of all the numbers that I shared before. And I think here is where the role of merit order or prioritization could play a critical role in addressing climate change and achieving the net zero scenarios. This would mean actually prioritizing the use for those applications or those sectors where low emissions hydrogen is the most effective or where it has the highest decarbonization potential. Historically, the demand has been driven and has been concentrated in refineries and industry sectors. Alone, these two sectors represent 90% of the hydrogen demand today. They have been relying enormously on hydrogen from unabated fossil fuel sources. So it's true that it makes sense to move these sectors from unabated fossil fuel hydrogen to low emissions hydrogen. It makes sense for reducing their carbon footprint, and also you also mentioned other benefits. But then if we look at the bigger perspective and the challenge that we have in terms of our climate goals, that shift, even positive, it's quite modest, right, comparatively speaking. And this is where we see that the limited transformative impact of low emissions hydrogen in sectors such as refineries, it's low or it's limited compared to what it can be in heavy industry, transport, and energy storage, right? And just to give an example of this or illustrate this, there was a study from Carbon4 that explains that the decarbonization potential, the unitary decarbonization potential of the use of low emissions hydrogen. And for example, in refineries, it means that how much it would allow you to reduce greenhouse gas emissions if you use low emissions hydrogen in the production of 1 unit of cubic meters of refined oil, it's around 15%. And then if you compare it to what it would create or how much it would reduce in terms of greenhouse gas emissions for ammonia production, methanol production, or even direct reduced iron in steel production, it's much greater, it's around 70%. So here's where we see that there's a transformative element and where the use of low emissions hydrogen truly shines. And even sometimes it's difficult when we talk about projections, right? Because at the end, the International Energy Agency is saying, let's move to a market where in 2030, 45% of hydrogen will be low emissions hydrogen. 45 is coming from new applications. But then we have the challenges that Guillaume was mentioning. We're not there yet. So what do we do? What do we do with that part of, and the reasons are it's not only about pricing, it's not only about regulation, it's the combination of all the challenges that the sector is facing.
Maybe this last angle, you mentioned regulation, so maybe this another angle that may be relevant. You mentioned technology, supply and demand, and the question of the different value chain, but what about the regulatory landscape? And what is at stake right now in order to push for the development of green H2? And do you see this notion of merit order covered by the regulation? Is it for any framework or incentive mechanism? Is it part of the debate, the question of the merit order from a regulatory landscape perspective?
I don't know if it's part of the debate. It should definitely be part of the debate, with a key question for me, which would be, how far do we want to go with the regulation mandating that this product has to be used there, which is more or less preventing the market forces to provide the efficiency. We have always this question on what is the level of techno-agnosticity the regulation should keep by stating what is the end game, what is the goal, reduction of CO2 emissions, basically, for certain sectors, possibly creating some markets, a bit like the market for low carbon hydrogen. How far should the regulation go into mandating the technology pathways? And we see that in Europe, we have many regulations that are really going very far into the specification of the solution you have to apply for a specific sector, rather than setting the rules of the game and letting then the market players decide what is the right technology pathways and what are the right instruments to reduce the emissions. That's also an important difference with other regulatory schemes we see in other geographies.
So can you tell us more about that? What are the geographical discrepancies that you see? Because you mentioned Europe versus the rest of the world, more or less, but actually there is various situations, I assume.
What I will say might be corresponding to what might change in the future with the recent election in the US. But what we see basically on hydrogen, because in fact it should be seen into the whole climate policies, set of policies. In Europe, it's quite prescriptive in terms of technology pathways directed to specific sectors, whereas in the US with the IRA, it's more based, the fundamentals is based on the carbon footprint of the hydrogen. So you don't make, at the first principle, a distinction between low carbon hydrogen produced from fossil fuels with carbon capture and storage at a certain level with all the relevant abatement of methane emissions, hydrogen produced with renewable and electrolysis, or hydrogen produced with nuclear power and electrolysis. What you say is that what you need is to use low carbon or low emissions hydrogen into some sectors and specific applications, both existing markets and new markets that needs to be developed in order to achieve the reductions. So that's a fundamental difference. And then you have the difference that in Europe, it's more based on the market's mandate, whereas in the US, it's more the production side to close the gap between the low carbon emissions hydrogen and the gray hydrogen production.
But also, I think it is important to say that policy hasn't. Maybe it started focusing on the production side and development of the infrastructure and all, but recently there has been signals of more and more policies focusing on the demand side of the equation, right, which is very important. In particular, policies directed specifically in Europe to promote or facilitate the use of low emissions hydrogen in new applications, right? We're seeing quotas and any other different like carbon contracts for difference that are trying to do this. So I think it's both, it's going there. Maybe it's not where it should be, but it is moving on that direction.
And you see that as a European question, the fact that the end use is more and more integrated, or what about the rest of the world in the different projects you've been involved in?
No, there's some signals also in Asia Pacific, countries like Korea or Japan are starting to having policies that also integrate this notion of end use. Not necessarily as big, but there's signals of those type of policies also.
Okay. So we've seen that actually there is no clear yes or no regarding the merit order. You are both converging on the fact that yes, but it's maybe a question of timing, saying that first we need to scale up, depending on the demand side, especially and potentially to cover sectors which are not particularly green per se, where we feel that your views on the timing is a bit different regarding the scarcity of the resource. Any final views or word that you would like to share with our viewers today on this final question on merit order, actually, and how to scale up?
Developing projects, so having the schemes that enable the actual final investment decisions, because this is what you need to get steel on the ground and build the plants, reduce the cost, have the feedback loops between the project, the R&D centers and the manufacturing centers in order to optimize the technology. All the virtuous circle we saw in the last 2 decades on renewable, which made huge progress. You have these learning curves that are everywhere in all the reports. Basically, for hydrogen, they are still on a forward basis. So what we need is to realize these learning curves, and then we need to take the decision, the investment decision, to build projects. Because the learning curves, you do not improve them massively just by having the ambition to develop project. It's by developing the project and having engineers facing the harsh reality of how do you integrate the stacks into the electrolyzer, how do you integrate the electrolyzer into the whole balance of plant. That's the concrete way to reduce the cost. So that's why on our side, we really think that at least for the initiation of the market, you need to tap the existing demand. Otherwise, you have to wait. It's a chicken and egg. You have to wait for the demand to build its own infrastructure, which will not happen until they are confident they will have hydrogen production, green hydrogen production or low carbon hydrogen production at the right cost. So nobody is moving because everybody is waiting the other one. So in this case, you solve the issue by tapping demand that exists, demand for the product, enabling the bankability of the project, and then you kickstart. And then the price will drop, and then we'll be able to direct the hydrogen to other usage. Exactly what I mentioned, we leverage the project in Normandy to supply green hydrogen for mobility in the Paris area. But with, if we wait for the mobility demand, possibly it will not enable a 200 megawatt investment in an electrolyzer.
I think from our side, it's more that we should not forget the merit order, right? Because if not, low emissions hydrogen is not really going to decarbonize the economy. As of now, as I mentioned before, we project not to really represent a role in decarbonizing in the next decade. So it means if we're in an area where there's not enough, then the little that is there, maybe start pushing it towards. Already, right now, the demand, as I said, 90% is going to refineries and chemical sectors. So start pushing the needle to the sectors that where it is more effective, where it has a bigger decarbonization potential. And I think if we just let the market solve the equation, it's not going to be enough. That's where the policy plays a crucial role in really creating incentives for the demand side so that the off-takers, where the decarbonization potential is higher, start coming more and more to the market, and then the movement is, I think it's both ways, it's chicken and egg, but also it's like everyone moving at the same time, because if not, it wouldn't work. So I think it's really not forgetting about the merit order and really focusing in the use, so that, because I think we need to move away, and the market has moved away from the era of hydrogen is going to be the solution for everything, right? We were there a couple of years ago. Right now, we're not there. I think that the decisions need to be more strategic. They need to be more focused on what is the outcome, what is the benefits that are created to achieve the net zero scenario, and then create the mechanisms, either financial mechanisms, policy mechanisms, to push the market there. So I think that's what it's missing today. We're just letting the market flow, and I don't think the market will move as fast as it needs to move to create the change that we need in all the hard-to-abate sectors. So that's really the difference.
Thank you very much to our estimated guest, and thank you all of our viewers for having joined us today. Coming up just after a short break, we will deep dive into the state of play of CCUS. So stay with us.
Thank you.